Okay, so for those of you who were with us the last session, welcome back. For the newcomers, welcome to this session. Today, we're going to have a panel, very conversational, around the future of insurance and the workforce. We have a couple of people on the stage with me, which I'll introduce in a second, and then we have one person who is going to be dialing in. But to get us started, even before the pandemic, there was a profound shift away from the way insurers were really working with the workforce, how to address skills gaps, how to update talent, how to look at different practices, and how to instill a more dynamic and agile way of working within our organizations. And then since the pandemic, obviously, as I'm sure all of us have faced, the competition for talent, especially in some fields like IT and technology, has intensified and accelerated. And so now, people and employees are wanting more flexibility. We used to sort of have the say as employers, but now the employees are sort of voting, and if they don't like what we're providing them and the experience and the career paths, they're voting with their feet. And so we've all seen a lot of attrition, especially in the last couple of years. And so we're starting to see a growing number of insurers really think about new talent strategies. What should that look like? What is the experience? How does that match up against, as we spoke in the last session with Angie, about our purpose and our values from that perspective? And we've conducted at EY some research coming out of the pandemic, and we've seen that and identified that there's 5 key aspects that are really fundamental to insurers as we move into the new world. One is, how do we really assess both the current and future demands of talent and look at what are the skills and competencies we need now? What do we need next? And what are we going to need in the future and beyond? The second one is really understanding what that supply and demand looks like. And now that we no longer maybe have geographic boundaries, where can we look further afield? And in what cities, what locations, what countries may there be a more deeper skill set that we can actually start tapping into? The third one is to really attract the best of the best. And we're all fighting for that. And we all know that right now, as we did coming out of our recent survey, it used to be flexibility that was number one. Compensation has now taken that over. So now everybody's thinking about the money, which is starting a little bit of a war on the salaries, which is just going to be a real pain for us in HR to have to deal with. And the last one is really thinking about, in this new world, how are we going to measure our associates and employees? And how are we going to reward them for the new behaviors that we really need them to undertake? So I'm pleased to welcome on the stage with me today, which is good because I have no voice. Woke up this morning. Angie Wesley, who's the SVP, Chief Talent Acquisition and Workforce Strategy Officer with TIAA. I have Brian Pasalich, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Syntoniq. And on the Zoom with us, we have Racho, who's the Senior Manager, Org Effectiveness, Allstate Insurance, co-founder and managing partner of Philcore Capital. And so if I'd like to get us started, and Maria, maybe if I can reach out to you to get us started, being that you're not with us here in the audience, thinking about how the pandemic has really impacted organizations and the workforce strategy. What is it in your company that you've been doing to really start to transform, given some of those challenges associated with the pandemic and the strap on talent that we have?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's what I'm most proud of is, I would say, proactive responsiveness. Kind of similar to Angie's story. The response from the very start of the pandemic, we almost immediately transformed into a fully operational remote workforce. And within a month, we served.
Oh, looks like we've lost sound. All right. While we're getting sound back, maybe we have one of the folks on the stage. Oh, we're back.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And at the same time, more than half of them did not have the proper equipment and resources to be able to work effectively remotely. And so the response that the organization had was we began to reduce our real estate. And for some that know, that was including selling off our corporate campus, which we had for 52 years. We have invested in more collaborative technology. Which we have had to learn very quickly how to use, just like others. And then another thing that was really interesting is a small group of employees, they pitched and launched a good office effort that allocated a set amount of dollars per employee to choose home office equipment they needed. That could have been a router, monitor, keyboard, and the most often selected item was an office chair.
Okay, thank you. Any additional from the folks on the stage with me?
Well, I just want to say that I was glad that I hung my managing principal hat up from the wealth management side just because right before COVID. However, stepping in and we did a soft launch with Syntoniq in January 2020, and it was great the first 2 months, and all of a sudden crickets. And what I'd realized right after that, we got really busy. And what it came from was, we're used to being face-to-face, the kitchen table, the, in the office meeting, and all of a sudden now we're stuck like Maria is here with us, right? We're on Zoom. How do we build that relationship? How do we go from what we're used to being that long developed relationship to now what can be perceived as a transaction? Because when we go on screen, a lot of what we do is transaction based. And so that's where behavioral science really helps to build that relationship and look and develop how better to understand and work with clients. And so for us, all of a sudden we went from this crickets to, things just took off from there, so.
Okay, great. And Angie, maybe coming over to you. When you think about your talent strategy, and I know we've just had a great discussion on some of that now and going forward, what do you feel are some of the biggest issues that may be driving that? And what are you seeing at the moment that you're really needing to focus your attention on from a workforce perspective in the HR world, as well as what you need your leadership to be helping you with?
Yeah, so I think we're, I've been in this industry now, we won't say how long, but for a while. And this is the first time in my entire career that I've ever seen the talent be in demand like it is. And essentially components of that coming out, like the comp war, like the, folks often think the candidate has to sell us on why we should choose them. We have to sell them on why they choose us. And so we're having to create that shift with our leaders to understand that, you might be looking at the two in the industry that frankly are getting pulled on by multiple people. So the speed to the market is critical with us. Consolidating the way we think about talent selection is critical to us. So there's no more days of, let me have you meet and talk to 15 people, and then we'll come back with a decision a month later. And so that's really put the talent strategy to test in a lot of ways, because we're having to consider things like
if they want to, we can certainly contract more rooms.
So that's making us think about things that we wouldn't have in the past around location of the role. Are we in the right market that has the best talent from a supply and demand? So we've done a lot of labor market studies to help direct us. Can we be competitive in this market? Do we have the right pitch? Can we tell the candidate enough about who we are? People think about TIAA, they don't think about a tech company. Yeah. More than half our staff is in our tech and ops group. So I think those are critical. Obviously, having a very robust, accurate workforce plan is something that we found even more important today, so we can go in knowing what to expect for the next year. We know what our historical attrition is, where it's at, what the skills are. We know what we're rolling into the new year with from an openings and an opportunity standpoint. We know what the builds are, or the strategic needs are. And so then we can then align tools, resources, people to then how we're going to cover that. But I would say there's also the reskilling piece. So we're having to look at our existing talent. Is there things that are going away? That's not a new story. There's things that are getting taken over by technology. So how can we use some of those folks and give them either gig assignments inside our environment to learn new skills, find out what they're interested in versus making an assumption because you're in the call center, you have these skills, therefore in return you want to go do X, or that's what you need to go do. So I think it's trying to get closer to our associates in what they want, not because they can do it today, but how can we help them potentially do it tomorrow? And so that's a balance. That's a lot of work inside while you're still trying to recruit externally. We've got markets of talent. As all of us know, technology is sometimes when the tech recruiting team gets new openings, they're just like, oh my goodness, like what are we gonna do? Because there is just so much demand out there, and it's a rat race to who can get to them first. We also are seeing key skills like in our financial advisor space. Like those are tough to come by anyway, but in this market, everybody is looking for that background to put into their insurance, to put into their trust, to deal with direct, participants. So we're having to be real nimble in our strategy, in that sometimes we are on the fly executing new ideas and trying stuff. I was just on the phone with LinkedIn yesterday, and I said, let's try it. Like, let's not talk about it, let's try it, So the days of like mulling over things are gone.
Yeah, sort of like try it, fall fast,
Right.
and get up and make
Absolutely.
improvements. And then maybe, Brian, if you can expand a bit on that, because I know we were talking to you last night as we were just discussing getting ready for today. You have a pretty diverse geographic location of your staff already, and a much smaller scale. So, what is the talent strategy in your mind? Because I know you also took on the role of running everything recently. So.
Yeah, it's been a challenge for us. I mean, we had a nice, cozy office in New York, and then we moved to Seattle and had our team in Seattle, India, and Balkans, and then all of a sudden, everything happened, so we went completely remote. And one of the biggest things for us is, I always see myself not as a leader, as a facilitator, and it's about having those constant conversations and understanding exactly what you said, around understanding what they want, what does it take to keep them interested in growing. I mean, our team in India is constantly being attempted to be poached with double salary. However, we're able to keep them because of the training, because of the support, because we're not having them do what we want them to do, we're helping them to do what they want to do, and really constantly focused on that. And that's been one of the biggest things for us. And I love to keep this constant R&D mindset, whether I'm in a big insurance company or I'm in a small tech company, that fail, that try and break stuff. And I think that's been one of the biggest things coming from financial services for so long. It's like, we're afraid to fail. We're afraid to break stuff. And this is where technology has done so well. It's like, let's try it, let's throw it and see if it works. If it doesn't, great, what do we learn from it and move on from there? And we've got that whole atmosphere and energy within our team. And I look at this, a lot of us use that word family. That to me, it's like my family was dysfunctional growing up, so I hate that word. I like to go with community. And if I hire someone today, that individual has the same amount of input as my CTO, who happens to be 24 and we call him boss baby. But it's a fun, as you can see, it's a fun environment in the sense where everyone has a say and input, and we're constantly trying new things. And my role is to facilitate this. Yes, at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, it's my responsibility. But at the end of the day, that's what I am as a facilitator, help them to grow and achieve what they want to do. And that's been a real challenge for us, but it's worked well. The other is we've recently gone to trying to get more towards that 4-day work week a little bit and allow them that balance, right? Because we tend to, this is the one downside I've seen is I think a lot of employers were worried about when we go remote, people are going to take slack off. And what I see, like my partner works for Amazon, both of us are working a hell of a lot longer. And so it's that forced mandated. I'll get on the phone sometimes and I'll force them to take time off. And I think that's a key. When we think remote, we think, okay, we're okay. Do we check in on them? Do we do the health check? It's like, how are you doing? No, how are you really doing? And get beneath the surface. And really pushing them to take some time off, because it can be easy to get caught up in that. And so if they see that, I think that's why, knock on wood, I haven't lost someone yet. And so, and it's been easy to recruit to that environment as well too for us.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks for all that input. The next one that's sort of like doing some research is like, as we think about the growth strategy for all our companies and the foreseeable talent pools, we've now got many different pools of talent that we may not have had afforded to us to be able to pull from in the past, and very different mechanisms that all of a sudden have opened up. So where are, maybe Maria or Angie, where are you touching on or looking for additional talent pools that are outside of the normal of where you've gone to in the past?
So I would say, the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is early talent. So I think that historically it's been very much, if we're going to hire tech interns or tech early talent, they need to come from a tech background, they need to have computer science or whatever it might be as their foundation. We are challenging that theory in that liberal arts students could be just as productive and more talented in the tech space. And so we are challenging our tech leaders, specifically in early talent, whether it be through interns or just early talent roles that we hire for, like, they don't have to fit that profile to be successful. Like, actually, that difference will bring value to your organization in how they think and bring new ideas. And I would say so far it's going well. We are starting to see the shift I also would say from a professional side, we are really challenging, and we started this when we went live with Workday and then moved to a new job framework, is that don't write the job for somebody, because oftentimes you are excluding the others that could do the role. And so we've tried to change our education requirements or drop our education requirements. We've tried to lessen the years of experience. And one of my senior leaders in the business a couple years said it best. He said, you could have 20 years of experience and had done a really crappy job, or you could have had 3 years experience and be excelling. So that experience piece is not so much the footstone anymore. And so we're challenging our leaders to think about it broadly, which brings us a different talent pool. And then separately, we're in all locations. We built out a model in India several years ago. We've got over 2,500 folks now that are in India. And in the beginning, it was very much, well, that's the India team, or that's the shared service team in India. And there became this kind of title that went with it. And we're shifting that to, no, we're a global team. Whether they work a different hour or they work the same hour, we all work together to get to the end result. And similar to your point, we know that skill market, we know where we need to put work there versus trying to do it here, and then we know what we have to put here. So there's a lot of components to it, but I would say that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, I think some of the, talking about the diverse talent pools that we've also started looking at and working with clients, and I've definitely done this in EY, is looking at the neurodiversity and people on the spectrum from that, and especially in technology, to your point, it's not the typical profile that you'd be looking at, but they have the people in those demographics have some amazing skill sets, and they would run rings around some of us who do have comp sci major degrees in just what they can see in the trends and the analysis and the patterns that they just come to mind. It sort of reminds me of anybody watches The Good Doctor, and you have that vision, and he just shows where all the medical issues are, and he knows how to fix it. They can sort of, that's the vision I get when we do that with those guys. So is any of you thinking along those lines from that diversity?
So we've talked about neurodiversity. I mean, we're about 18,000 employees, and so we have been trying to do a lot of work just in diversity as a whole. That is something we don't have a necessarily formal program around, but it's definitely on the list with our technology space as a first. But the other thing that we have done, and we've done it in pockets, and it's definitely something that I've highlighted we want to do more of, is when we talk about diversity recruiting, everybody goes to gender and ethnicity.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, I have a daughter that's going to be a junior in college, and so during COVID, when we were home working and she had to be home, at that point she was in high school, but she was remote, she would hear some of my conversations or some of my Zoom calls. And one day she just said, why is diversity important? And it wasn't from a place of negative or I don't get it, it was just her view of diversity was so different than us in the professional space. She doesn't see diversity from a gender or ethnicity. She sees it from an ability and skill and things like that. And so I kind of took that and I was like, wow, I wonder what would happen if you had a group of folks like her together looking at what our current view is on diversity, or our strategy on how we think about getting that in the market. And so we've done that in a couple pockets, and it's just really fascinating to hear how this next generation thinks about it and how they view people and work. And so it's challenged us to say, gosh, do we really want to be so deliberate in how we focus? And if we do that, are we missing something even more important? So that's a way not so much to hire that talent, but to leverage people that are out of the traditional way to come in and give us a view on what we think we might be doing well. That then obviously helps drive our strategy and change our strategy. So it was really impactful, and then we're even doing it now within some of our high schools. Not high school meaning we bring the students in, which we can do that too, but really test us. It's kind of like the kindergartners can build a marshmallow tower better than we can because we overthink it. Well, I think in some aspects these high schoolers or young adults can build a better strategy than we do because we make it too complicated. So we're really trying that perspective.
Maria, Brian?
Yeah, from a neurodiversity perspective, one thing that I would add that we've done is We've tapped into like diversity of thought and working style. And so one thing that I advocate for is entrepreneurship. It's there within your organizations. That's entrepreneurship with an I. So your corporate entrepreneurs, people with that spirit, that are, in the context of these companies. And that's empowering people with resources, access, and skills. So I'm a co-founder of one of our employee resource groups, which is called Entrepreneurs at Allstate. We grew from 5 employees to over 700. And we run our internal Shark Tank and startup challenges. And our startup challenges are gamified action learning. So not only is it kind of engaging people, and people of all ages and backgrounds, while there is a high skew with like the Gen Zs and millennials, it's people of all backgrounds. And we take real business problems and put them in the hands of average employees. They get kind of immersed into our strategy and our business. And then we teach them high value skills like design thinking, customer research, product development, rapid prototyping, financial valuation, and pitching their ideas. They're able to take these skills back to their day jobs. And, when Brian talked about learning how to be comfortable with ambiguity and how to like fail fast and learn from it, like that's really like unleashing that entrepreneurial spirit in your organization.
No, thank you. Maria, if we could stay with you a little bit as well, because you were talking about skills. If we think about the trends that we're seeing out there, one of the important things that every organization I know I'm having discussions with is really trying to assess, you sort of alluded to it a little bit earlier, Angie, is what are the competencies and the skills that you have in-house today? And what do you need now? What do you need next? And as you mentioned, some are going away. We don't need those anymore. So where do you think your company really needs to look at and address that skills gap, and where they are going to need to look to grow to maximize the capability you have in your organization as well as outside?
Yeah, so I would say that we have strong capabilities from a technology standpoint, but technology is vastly evolving and changing, that we have to take a more open-minded approach to it. So still like a muscle we're needing to work through, but figuring out what we need to build, buy, or rent, and then being able to be open with where we find solutions. So I had the opportunity to be on a rotation in our corporate development, and it was focused on startup engagement. And that was being able to tap into, startups that are creating amazing solutions, and being able to bring these new technologies in, which may be very niche and maybe something we don't want to invest in from like because it's just constantly changing. We want to bring them in. They can speed up our ability to connect for our employees to connect with our customers, understand our customers, and they can fast path our ability to build capabilities. So, I would say that's an area that we're still figuring it out, but that has been one way where we've taken creative solutions to build talent internally and then work with people externally.
Mm-hmm. Brian, anything to add to that?
One thing, we wouldn't be a good behavioral science fintech if we didn't follow that. So behaviors is such a big thing that we focus on, and looking at not finding an alignment, but finding complementing, right? And so that's a big thing for us and how we approach things. But 2 big things that I always look at. One is that childlike curiosity. I'm probably the biggest child at 48. I refuse to grow up, and my partner teases me about it all the time, but always asking why. So that's one thing that everyone on my team, I look for that in them. I also look for the failure, and like my CTO, I hired him because he was a failed CTO at a prior company. Failure is a big thing, and we get so caught up in how it looks, and we have a saying, don't get caught up in how it looks, have it turn out. And that's the one thing that everyone on the team, I spend more time on that than I do on technical skills, is getting them to be okay to have the wrong answer, right? And so that's one area, and looking at their background. Resume is the last thing I look at. Their experience is the last thing I look at. I start asking some fun personal questions to really figure out, all right, have they screwed up before? How comfortable are they? Are they okay having the wrong answer? Because that makes, from that community or collective that we've worked to build, it makes it a lot easier in the conversations, and so I think that's and it gets us through. Like I have a joke that's like, when it goes wrong, it's my fault, everybody can blame me. So that way it's okay, and we move through things so much faster than it gets to be it's your fault. No, and we spend so much time on that, but those are one of the core things that we've looked at now that I feel the traditional way of doing things, where it has been the resume, it's been the degree, it's been the experience, and looking at prior firms and adding to that. It works, but it doesn't get us where we need to go, at least for us.
No, and I think, with which everybody has sort of discussed, we had an example of this, and you start looking at, what skill sets do your people have? So you may have somebody who sits in the finance department, but on the weekend, they've got a passion for developing Apple iOS because it's open source. But because you've not really tapped and asked those questions, you don't know what other things your current workforce actually are doing or can do, that you can then maybe move people around and have some more agility and mobility internally. And I think the other thing you mentioned too, and everybody here, is, we've grown up in a world in our careers where you don't fail. Failure is not a good word. And it is changing that psychological mindset that failure is actually good. I have one client a couple of years ago before we even got to the pandemic, and it was a pizza party if it failed. Yeah. You didn't get a pizza party for when it was succeeded. It was a pizza party for when it failed. So
The one thing that I would add to your point around someone doing app design on the weekend, so we are trying to leverage our technology to collect that, because we can have the best conversations, but then how do you get all that together? And so, when we ask our associates to create their career profile, update their career profile, we've really built out those skills or interest or competency section, and even left some of it open for them to fill in because they might not see themselves in one of those blocks. And then that way we can obviously aggregate that data and look at it a lot of different ways to then understand exactly that. Like, we got a guy in finance, but they're doing IT on the side, for fun, or media for fun, or whatever it might be. And sometimes we'll even catch people on LinkedIn that are posting something that's like, "Ooh, that's kind of cool," and then we'll try to close that loop to be like, how did you think of that, or whatever. So I do think leveraging the tools to help you in those conversations, which then will give you the output as you then think about, well, a call center normally would do X or be able to do X, but then if you look at the call center profiles, you're seeing like this wide diversity of what they might already have skills in, potentially, like people that had their MBAs, that just never really pursued or had the opportunity in a tight market before to pursue it. So that's just another way to also leverage all the things that we've been saying.
No, it's really interesting. I mean, all three of you in parts of the conversation have talked about build, buy, or borrow. Mm-hmm. But what about bot? And so we are not repopulating this earth fast enough. Even before the pandemic, we were not going to have enough staff or workforce to actually carry out some of the activities we need in the next 20 to 30 years. And so, early on, and a couple of years ago, it was like automation was going to do us all out of a job. It's not going to do that. Today, we now need automation to actually supplement the fact that we don't have enough people to do the work we need to do. So I'd like to just tap into, what are you guys thinking in your organizations around where you automate, where you use automation, where you use AI to supplement some of the workforce that you are now not necessarily going to have in place to use?
So I think for us, we have some bots already in place in our process behind the scenes, whether it's just taking multiple screens and you have to kind of pull them together to get one set of data output. I think we are, at least in our space, being a federal contractor, we are a little bit handcuffed in some ways on what we want to do versus what we can do, and AI is one of those when we think about how we automate some of the processes to make it easier for our recruiters to look at talent, because some of the laws would say, you shouldn't do that with AI. So then we try to think about, well, then where else can that be a value for us? So, when we look at our partnerships, whether it be like, as an example with LinkedIn, there's AI in there, especially when you are using it correctly and helping the recruiters be simpler and smarter about that is really key. And it's interesting how hard that is to break that old cycle versus letting that technology kind of take over. So we work through that. And I would just say for the whole process, we're always saying, gosh, do I have to do those 6 clicks? Or could I figure out a way to only have to click it once? Or even better, could it deliver to me? And so it's funny because people know that I love to get into the weeds on stuff, and they're always like, that's not where you should be. But I'm like, if I can't understand and explain it, then I'm not doing my job. But then they also love and hate to hear me say, well, can I take those 9 clicks and put it into one? Because I challenge them, and what I've always said is similar to what we're hearing is, it's okay to tell me no. Just tell me no because you actually looked at it. Don't tell me no just because we don't want to do it. So I do think we have to continue to push the envelope a little bit on how we think about technology helping with our job, not replacing it or not doing something for us.
I think one thing, we look at how to automate, and we always go back to the traditional, like, all right, what's the least value? What are things that are just the business sense? And I think that's good to a point, but I think we start to lose some of that creativity, the flexibility and things, and looking at our team. So again, that's another thing, is from the team itself, getting input from them as far as where areas and things that we can streamline to make easier. I mean, ML and AI is behind the scenes in a lot of what we do, but at the same time, I'm very big about processes and structure, which my first 30 years of my life, I hated, and I know better, and all of a sudden the next, I'm like, all right, this is actually an easy way to do things. However, that said, it's like, you can lose some of that creative thought in that process. So where's the value as opposed to looking at it from an ROI standpoint? And that's what we've tended to focus a little bit more on, that aspect of it. So, if it's maybe a $10 an hour type of position, but the value that we see as a team, not just, with our clients, is significantly higher, then we need to keep that. However, other stuff, what can we systemize and process so that way it makes it easier to get us to scale faster, so.
Okay, cool. And we've got a couple of minutes left. Just have one more. Do you have something, Maria, to say?
Yeah, I would just say, Carolyn, from like a org effectiveness perspective, that's kind of how I'm looking at it. It's really understanding the integration of technology and human. I like to think about digital transformation as human digital transformation. How do we actually partner with and integrate the technology to increase our capacity, increase our capability? And it's, and really making it a and conversation versus an either or. Yeah. So I think that's an area that is, for me, definitely top of mind, and an area still that we have to work on.
Yeah, and you hit on the key word. It's giving our staff the capacity to go do the other things that we really need them to do, and not be stuck in, as you said, Brian, the traditional transactional stuff where we do that. So we have about 4 minutes left, and we'd like to just open up maybe to Q&A. And we do have a mic runner, I think, in the audience. So anybody have any questions for the panel or myself that they want to put out for today? If I said there was $100 on the back end of it, they'd all have a heads up. Any questions? Okay, well then maybe just in closing out, as we have a couple of more minutes. In the last 2 years, we've made great strides, especially in the technology progress. What opportunities do you still feel we need to consider leveraging, and how do we do that and use that in order to make our associates, our employees' lives easier, simpler, and a better experience that will actually help drive their careers into what you mentioned, Brian, earlier, to where they're excited and they want to actually participate in their strengths versus where we want them to participate?
Well, I think there's capabilities in some of the technologies that we have right now. Like if I think about Microsoft Office or 365, there's that analytic component that comes with it, or that is available, and it really tells you how your people are working, like where they're spending their time, their meetings, like their peak hours. And so I just think there's even things like that again, we got to free up the time to be able to do that analysis and really get in it, to where we can then learn behaviors that might be hidden or just masked, to then be able to help those employees either work more effectively, take time off, get off, those type of. So I think there's it's kind of like there's modules within the technologies that we have that we might not be utilizing to its fullest because we needed to get its main purpose out. But then there's all these other things it can do behind it, similar to Teams. There's lots of things. So to me, I think that's the continued opportunity is and I said this the other day, don't go throw a bunch of more tools at it. Don't do a bunch more interfaces. Like, we need to see what we have and we're not leveraging.
Yep. Great.
I think one thing to add, for us, it's been around technology, I think, is still not built to understand people truly, right? And that's been a big focus of ours, not just with our client, but our internal team around how can I help each of my team understand behaviorally how they think when they make decisions? How can I create that awareness and understanding, not to go down the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but at that same point, create that right understanding. They understand this now. What's that next best action to help them accomplish the outcome that they're looking to achieve? And that's been a key focus of ours, because building trust in themselves first, and then trust in us as the employer, and then that confidence in themselves and confidence in the employer. And at the core of that is that empathy component, which still to this day, I think, AI, I know there's all this talk around it, still not going to be able to build those things yet. Outside of Spotify, which I think is probably the closest at understanding me, everything else, they think they do, but they're taking a thin slice of transaction data. And data science to a T is it really gets a real thin slice. I know that EY did a piece October 2020 where they talked about if data was the new oil, behavior is the new data, because it's about helping you understand yourself. And so I think that's another area, is spending more time with the individual, helping them to get themselves, instead of what can they do for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing where you're going, Brian, is like going back to the competencies and skills, because now data is key.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know how to take the data and actually translate that into information to be able to make decisions. And they're fearful of it, and then they don't trust the data.
Right.
So we're now moving into a highly technological environment, and people don't trust data, don't trust the technology. And so we've got a big jump to actually get people through to say it's okay.
Yeah.
So it's building that up.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely key, because, I have the people analytics team under me, and so we've really made a shift over the past few years that we're not just delivering the data, we're delivering the story, the so what, and so that way we're helping folks understand it versus manipulate it to tell the story they want.
Yes.
Yep.
And so I think having those really experts in that analytical space, that's less about aggregating and doing all that stuff. We can have regression models and all this good stuff, but it's really like, okay, what is that telling? Is historic is it actually predicting the future? And then how you tie multiple sets of data together to give you that predictive piece is just critical. And some companies are on the very high spectrum already, and some are on the journey.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're right on time. We just went to 0. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. Thank you, Maria, for joining us virtually, for Angie, for Brian, and please have a great rest of your conference and enjoy the day. Thanks very much.